So I will ask our panelists to turn on their cameras, if you would. And I would like to introduce Catherine Matisse, who is Chief Development Officer at Enterome. Richard Stead, Rick is the Principal at Biopharma Consulting Services, and Praveen Chaturvedi, who is the CEO of Oceanics and actually involved with many other companies. So I will ask you all, if you would, to briefly introduce yourself in 1 minute or so, with the idea of how you got to where you are today in your respective positions, or the line of work that you do, and hence why you are on this panel today. So maybe Catherine, a few words on who you are.
Yes, with pleasure. Thank you. Hello, everybody. So I'm Catherine Matisse. I'm a pharmacist, and I spent all my career in the biotech company, starting in the regulatory field, and I especially conduct several IND, as well as also CTA for Europe for many phase 1-2 up to the phase 3 trial with very innovative products, including gene and cell therapy. And I dedicated my career to be mainly in the biotech area, and in small and medium-sized companies. And I joined for now 2 years Enterome company, where I am assuming the responsibility of development activities, including the pharmaceutical development as well as the preclinical regulatory activities.
Thank you, Catherine. Some fields, Rick, that you know also pretty well. So Rick.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Rick Stead. I'm here in Seattle, Washington. I'm trained actually in Boston as an internist and hematologist. I've spent about 33 years in the industry, knowing actually Jean-Jacques back at Amgen, and then I moved to Immunex. They were bought by Amgen. For the last 20 years or so, I've been serving as a consultant to mostly small, mostly underfunded biotech companies, both in the US and in Europe, and also in Asia. I've been on the board directors of a couple of small companies, and my main job is to help companies translate their preclinical science into clinical trials, and think about clinical and regulatory strategy moving forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Rick. Praveen.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining this morning. My name is Praveen Chaturvedi. I'm a neuropharmacologist by training. I've been in the industry for over 35 years. I began my career in a large pharma and then moved into the world of biotech in Boston 30 years ago, and been a part of 2 early stage biotechs that became very big. Then I left the world of professional employment and decided to become professionally unemployed 20 years ago. And I have started a series of companies in the biotech world that have translated technologies into new drugs. I've been fortunate to have hired really, really good people and have had the opportunity to work with really smart people. So I've had several drugs on the market. I also have faculty appointments at MIT and Georgetown Medical School. Along the way, I've been on many boards and many startups. So it's an honor to be here, and thank you, Jean-Jacques, to be inviting me with Catherine and Rick over here. They are fantastic people, so look forward to the discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Praveen, and to all of our auditors. Please do know that after the meeting, we will have a networking session where you will have the chance to interact with the panelists as well, if you so choose. So let's get to the meat of the subject, and I certainly am no specialist in that, so I kind of read up a little bit before this meeting, and I tried to understand the pre-IND meeting and what is required. And as part of that, the company that wants to have a pre-IND meeting needs to propose the whole list of questions that they want to ask the agency by discipline. With the context for each question, they have to list the FDA staffers that they would like to have on the meeting. Basically, it feels like you need to have an FDA staffer on your staff to be able to start the process. So maybe, Praveen, to you, the first question is, I don't think every single of your companies had somebody from the FDA in your staff, but how do you organize yourself? What are the big principles that you fall back on to start this organization of let's go towards an IND?
Thank you, Jean-Jacques. It's a very deep question. So just to break down the term IND, it's investigational new drug. And so when you make a drug, you have to understand that the FDA does not approve a drug, it approves a label. And it's the label which becomes your package insert that allows you to use it. So you always start from the end. And what we always think about is, what is the label that you would like your drug to have, what is the indication you intend to treat, and what the dose is going to be. So what you develop at that point in time as a team is what is called a target product profile. And so you develop a target product profile with that target label in mind, so that someone like Rick, who's a physician, knows how to use it. And so you start to populate that. And when you sit down, the target product profile allows you to think about the clinical indication, the route of administration, and the drug is basically made up of 4 components: the active ingredients, the formulation, the therapeutic indication, and the route of administration. So once you have those 4 things sorted out, you actually have a blueprint for what all you need. So all my teams are always asked to develop a target product profile first before you start any experiments. Hopefully that answers your question, Jean-Jacques.
It does, but only very partly, right? And we're going to dig into all those aspects now a little bit more. But before, so you have started this by the FDA does not approve a drug, it approves a label, which I find very interesting. And let's dig a little bit more into what the FDA anticipates and what is their frame of mind, what are they looking for? Catherine, you've interacted many times with the FDA. Can you comment on what are they thinking about when you try to meet with them?
In fact, so based on my experience and the IND I've submitted, what is important for the FDA is to have a justified project, well constructed, and with a clear safety control of the patient, which will be treated with your proposed product. So this is a key for the FDA, which is very vigilant on the safety aspect. So what is important and is to have a well-documented dossier, especially on the preclinical aspect, including the proof of concept study, as well as the safety study, if you have a safety study in animals, if you have to do it, because for some products you can avoid to conduct a safety assessment study because you don't have the animal model appropriate to do it. So these are key elements in your package, and for sure a well-described synopsis, clinical synopsis of your proposed clinical study of phase 1-2. So these are the key elements, and which has to be presented to the FDA. And for a successful IND, what is important, but maybe we can rediscuss later, is to prepare your IND by interacting before with the IND, with the FDA member, and requesting for a pre-IND meeting. But maybe, Jean-Jacques, we will discuss later this specific topic.
Well, let's go into it. And maybe, Rick, I'll ask you to start off, but then everybody please jump in. When you do have a meeting with the FDA, so you give us a hint already of what they're looking for, but who are the people in front of you? What do they know? And, how do you prepare yourself for that conversation? Who are they?
Yeah, that's a great question. First and foremost, I think some people think of the agency as an adversary. Actually, I think them as a partner. They're your development partner that you're going to be living with, hopefully, for the 5 to 10 years it takes you to develop the drug. You have expertise from clinical medicine, from CMC, from toxicology, pharmacology, all the different disciplines that Pravin indicated go into making a drug. They're all sitting across the table from you or across the Zoom line from you, but they really want to be a partner. They want to, if you're transparent with them, they will be helpful with you. So your deal, so you have to, you bring to the meeting, it's people that are related to the specific questions you have. You think you know the CMC and it's nailed down, that may, you don't even bring up CMC questions, for instance. If you have a tox question about a finding or about the design of the study, they're going to have their expertise on the other side of the table. So you want to bring your expert. There, you bring corresponding expertise relative to the questions that you're asking, which would be driven by your science.
So if you think, to just dig into what you said, Rick, there, if you think that you have the CMC section nailed down and this is not particularly contentious, and you don't bring particular questions yourself, is it possible, though, that the agency might think differently, and as you put in front of them the whole package, they might actually ask you questions in things that you didn't want to really probe them on?
Sure, that happens. Unfortunately, excuse me. Unfortunately, it doesn't really happen until you submit your IND. If you haven't given them the information in the briefing document before your meeting, then you can have an unpleasant surprise later on. So I think you give them enough in your briefing book to convince them that you do have certain aspects nailed down. And if you don't, then you ask a question about it. And I think that's the art. But you basically have an hour with these folks. You get some written responses often before the meeting, but you have to really focus your time and focus on the things that you think are most critical to your program. And, you know, having that judgment about what to ask about and what you have nailed down, that goes with the expertise that you have on your team. And that's really important.
Just a few words on the importance of the briefing documents and how you prepare them. I mean, Catherine, you mentioned that before when we prepared. Pravin, you sure have an opinion?
Yeah, Catherine, you want to go first? Yeah.
No, go ahead, Pravin.
Well, you know, I think we see there is the briefing document basically has to address what is the question you're going to ask the FDA, right? So effectively, if you know that there is a clinical indication. So for those of you who are new, first-time entrepreneurs and do not know what is needed in an IND, you should just go to the fda.gov website. There is a guidance document of what modules are required. So when Rick says CMC, Pharm Tox, clinical, those are the 3 major modules, 3, 4, and 5. The IND document is what is reviewed, and IND is neither approved nor disapproved. You get a go-ahead to start a clinical trial. So either you go on clinical hold or you are allowed to proceed to a trial. So your briefing document, when I said at the beginning, make a target product profile, write your clinical indication, what you want to talk in the briefing document, your rationale of why you think that what you are developing is meaningful to help a patient. So if you start from that, you're supposed to provide a general investigational plan. What does your clinical plan look like? What is the label you're seeking? And what you're bringing, what is your product that you are going to put into the patients? And what is your plan to do non-clinical as well as toxicology studies to support your clinical investigation? So when you sit down and write a briefing document, you sit down and you put your background in there, and then at the back of that, you ask a question. The FDA is a legal entity. It's a regulatory body. It only answers yes and no. So you ask a question that this is my CMC package. I have developed a tablet and I intend to dose these patients at this dose based on the data that I have. Do you agree? And then the agency will answer, we agree, or they will say we disagree. And when they disagree, they will write something. And that's what Rick is referring to, that you send the briefing document. The briefing document is something that you are specifically asking some questions that you want to get guidance on. The FDA is not your consultant. The FDA is the legal body that sanctions it. So you have to ask the question very specifically. So you need to go find experts like Rick, like Catherine, who will help you ask the right question, because you cannot send 99 questions for a 1-hour meeting. They are not going to answer them because they're going to ask you, what is it that you're asking us to sanction or opine on? And you have to really spend some time. So in the beginning, Jean-Jacques, when you said you don't have an FDA staffer on your staff, of course not. The FDA staffer is not going to help you because you need to know what you need help with. Many times that help is needed either in the clinical indication, sometimes it's needed in the clinical trial design because Rick is doing something new, for instance, he's our clinician. We need to make sure that he's on the right path. Sometimes it's a CMC question. So your briefing document needs to be very precise and you spend time. You cannot make this up overnight. It takes several weeks to months to prepare a briefing document with the questions very, very pointed that the FDA then allows you to have a type A, type B, or type C meeting. You have to ask that as well. And type A is a face-to-face, type C is only written responses, type B is somewhere in the middle. So you have to request all of that, and that's the specificity of the briefing document. Catherine, you want to elaborate on that as well, some?
Yes, I fully agree with what Praveen has said, and so the briefing document needs to be very well documented and focused mainly on the question you would like to raise to the agency. Again, the FDA is a regulatory body very open for discussion and very pragmatic. So what is important in the briefing document when you prepare a pre-IND meeting is to have a very structured and straight to the point question, like Praveen said, do you agree or not, and to have a clear answer from the FDA. And the FDA is generally very clear in their answer. And all the questions you intend to raise in your briefing book is important to be justified and well justified, and you need to give your position and to argue and to defend why you want to do as such or why you don't want to do in this direction. So this is a very important document to be sent in advance to the FDA. Generally, they ask you to send it between 4 to 7 weeks before the meeting. So it has to be prepared in well advance, and the meeting has also to be requested at least 2 or 3 months before the date you would like to have the meeting. So again, this is an important interaction and important document to exchange with the authority.
So this pre-IND meeting is critical, needs to be well prepared, have a briefing book. What is the role of the previous meeting, the pre-IND meeting? Why would you have that and how does that help?
Yes, so it's a very good question, Jean-Jacques, because it's not very well, very known, and you have the opportunity, because when you ask for a pre-IND meeting, it's to prepare the IND. And you need to have already at this stage a well-structured clinical synopsis, and you need to know where you want to go for a phase 1 or phase 1/2. But before this stage, you are in the situation to have interaction with a need to have interaction with authority to discuss a preclinical package or CMC question. But not having in hand again the clinical view and the clinical design of your study. So there is a specific procedure with the FDA which is called pre-IND. So it's a first step to discuss with the authority. And in the same direction, you have to send a briefing book with the question you want to discuss with the authority. But especially focus generally on the preclinical program.
Rick, you have used those meetings, I trust?
Well, it's interesting. Some divisions, are very fond of them. Others, not so much. And so you don't necessarily have that opportunity.
The agency is not monolithic. Yeah, it's not.
Well, and I think that is actually a very key point. each division, it's usually set aside by therapeutic area, oncology or nephrology, cardiac disease. The division director defines the personality. And we've been using the word FDA in a refer to the U.S., but my experience in Europe and elsewhere is that particularly Western Europe, the regulatory authorities there are similar to the FDA. They're not as big. They may not have the depth and breadth always of expertise, in which case they bring in some outside people sometimes. But the focus is on the same things that Pravin said, and you need to be fully transparent with them if you want to get the right answers. And you need to build a relationship with trust. To me, the most important thing about these early meetings, with a pre-IND or a pre-IND meeting or the IND itself, is building a relationship of trust with the agency so they know they can count on you to be transparent.
We already have quite a few questions, and thank you for those who have asked those questions. I will slide in a few of those questions as we go forward, but please don't hesitate to continue to put questions in the Q&A. One of the things that I wanted to do right now is maybe talk about data a little bit, but before that, there is a question I did want to put to you, because these briefing documents, which are really critical and are, I remember from Amgen Day that we had medical writers that helped us have a very clear, very synthetic document that was easy to read and actually a pleasure to review. I always felt, again, not being a medical doctor, that I learned a lot when I was reading those documents. So are there examples of successful briefing document that you can find on the web somewhere?
No, these are confidential documents that belong to the FDA is United States government. I assume it's the same in Europe. They are sworn by the Official Secrets Act. So they do not put up stuff. So when drugs get approved under the Freedom of Information, they will actually give you the review documents. But IND, pre-IND, the entire NDA information itself, exactly. You saw Rick do this. Those are embargoed. If any of that gets leaked, heads will roll and the division will be disbanded. So these are not available on the web.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about data, because there is a lot of data that all the companies are generating. Some of it is great, some of it is so-so, some of it is downright bad. How selective can you be in your documents in terms of the data that you are putting out there?
Well, the word selective is bad.
Exactly.
I'm a provocateur.
You must submit all data,
Yes.
because all data shows the transparency. I'll come back to what Rick and Catherine are emphasizing, and I would re-emphasize that. Trust comes when you are transparent. Trust does not when you selectively present any data that suits your hypothesis or premise. And you are not showing things, because eventually they are going to find out. And remember, the FDA sees every country and many more things than an individual entrepreneur or one company would see. So they would pretty much know what to expect with any therapeutic area. They would be the experts, And so not telling them something because you don't understand what happened in your experiment or some bad outcome happened would be very bad. Having an outcome that was bad that you don't understand, and you say, we don't explain it, but this happened, but you include that in your dossier, they will actually read it. And sometimes, like Rick was saying earlier, they will be your partner and help you understand some more detail about it. So my advice to everybody listening, all 102 of you, please do not be selective and choosy. Don't be the judge of what you're going to tell the FDA or EMA, and that would be a kiss of death for your trust factor. I'll let the others also speak on that.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
Yeah,
in fact, sorry. Yes, in fact, Pravin is right. The key word with the FDA is the transparency. It's very important, and we need to build a relationship, as Richard said before. And by given all the data you have, even if you have, for example, animals deaths, and you cannot explain, it has to be submitted to the authority, and they could propose you to other alternative to assess what you are observing with you in your study. So clearly the transparency is very important. And for example, if you don't include all the data, and if you are authorized to move forward with your clinical study and your IND, and if by accident you have a strong issue during your clinical study, they could put on hold your trial and go back to the data, and also audit your internal data in your lab. And if you have hidden some data, it could be which could explain what is observed in your clinical trial. It could be a big issue, a big concern for the company.
Yeah, I would go one step further. You know, it's really about trust and transparency. But the other thing is to not oversell your data. You know, many entrepreneurs and CEOs are in the selling mode all day and all night to investors, right? That's kind of what you have to do to raise enough money to fund your program. You know, you want to put your data in context and a good light with the regulatory authorities, but you don't want to oversell it. This is not about selling. This is about getting advice and consultation to make your program successful. So sometimes I see a little difficulty in shifting gears between those two modes of interaction.
How bad can it get when somebody doesn't, I mean, when we discussed before, there have been examples where companies did not share all the data that resulted in tragedy. So the agency, I mean, there is a question of trust and moving forward in a transparent manner, but there are reasons for that also. And so can you just give us a few words on how bad it can get?
Well, you know, it can ultimately, in terms of how bad it can get as bad as the unnecessary death of a patient. And that's been well documented in a number of studies, from gene therapy studies to antiviral studies. And it's, you know, there are examples where, you know, there was data that were intentionally not disclosed. There are examples where people just didn't think the data was all that relevant. So it can happen for a variety of reasons. The other thing, you know, on a little lighter note, but not really, overselling your data is also a problem. I once was with a company that we thought we had removed all the overselling in their investigator's brochure and their protocol, but the division director found one example on page 49 of the investigator's brochure and said, your statements in the investigator's brochure seem to be intentionally misleading. Would you please remove those? That's not a good way to, you know, generate trust in a long-term relationship. So, you know, it's about the relationship, but it's, you know, seriously, it's about life and death in some situations.
Praveen?
I would echo 100% what Rick just said, Jean-Jacques, because if you're making medicine, you know, you intend to make someone's life better. You know, you're trying to help a sick person get better. So, you know, there is a component of ethics that is above par. You have to be above par because the agency is not your police. They are not there to watch out for crimes. And so this is criminal in many ways if you choose to put a patient's life in jeopardy. So I think that basically not only destroys your trust with the agency, it destroys your trust with the clinical community and your other stakeholders. And your investors find out that you misled them. They will be very upset. Your board members will be basically looking to end the company because they don't want to be associated with such a company, because all of us, then all the stakeholders get affected by it. So I would echo Rick. Catherine, you?
Exactly. Yes, I fully agree with what you are saying, and there is a strong impact for sure on the patient and also on the scientific and medical community. And we have example to have some project in a specific area where all the trials were put on hold in the world by the FDA because of an issue, such issue with a clinical trial. So clearly, it could impact also all the field of development and many companies.
Just a quick comment, as we are getting a few questions which are targeting very detailed steps and are repeating some of the comments that were made. So first, the talk is recorded and you can review anything that was said if you need. Also, there will be another talk in September where we will go over very many detailed steps more from a regulatory perspective, and we will have critical players again in the ecosystem there to explain to all the participants a much more detailed aspects. I just would like to get a sense again from the entrepreneur perspective on this panel. So the question of time and how you handle things, and maybe I would like specifically to talk about CMC for that, just one question. Because of course, we have already emphasized the importance of time and the planning process and, you know, all the animal experiment that will give you such an answer, and then the talks and all that, that flows into a very nice Gantt chart. I can see that perfectly. But CMC can take a long time and maybe underestimated sometimes. So can you comment on how long it takes to put a good CMC package together?
Yeah.
In fact, in practice, it takes the same time as a preclinical package, but many times it's underestimated by the company. So, but clearly, it's the workload and the timeline could be similar to a preclinical package. And you can have a very nice Gantt chart also to be put in place for all the CMC activity with the CDMO, with the CMO you will work with, who could help you in much more detail to put in place this Gantt chart. So clearly, it's not a big issue with the CMC. It's equivalent to the preclinical activity, but it's my personal experience. So maybe Praveen and Richard, you have another opinion.
I think it's a starting point, Jean-Jacques, because it's a rate-limiting step to starting an IND process. Because you cannot do any preclinical work, you can definitely not do any clinical work without having the material. And so if you're a small molecule person, you know, and the synthetic process is 29 steps, or you're making a biologic, that's a very complicated biological process. You need to actually have that under control. So, you know, one of the things that we emphasize on the teams that I'm on the boards of is the agency will want to know how well you know your drug. And so if you don't know your drug, the agency is certainly not going to worry about knowing your drug. So you must know it well. So in the CMC, what happens is as you start to make stable and consistency, you have to have reproducibility and rigor so that every time you take a medication, you get the same dose each time. So how do you assure that, right? So the three things that the agency sort of approves on basis are quality, safety, and efficacy in that order. Quality is defined by your CMC section because that's where reproducibility comes in. Safety is a combination of both clinical and non-clinical studies, long-term and short-term. And then efficacy, they really look at the clinical pivotal studies that basically define the dose that has the effect. So if you look at all three of them, quality comes first, because if you don't have consistency of that quality, then your safety and efficacy will be all over the map. And so I would say that it's always the rate limiting step. For me, I agree with Catherine, it takes at least as long as the preclinical studies does. Sometimes it even takes longer.
It's just one thing to add. It's not only the rate limiting step, but it's the foundation of everything we do. And please, one message to get through on CMC, it's the foundation. Please don't shortchange it. because it'll cost you in the end. I've seen companies come up with formulations I wouldn't want to give to a human being due to pH or osmolality, etc. So please get it right.
And maybe to illustrate, sorry, Jean-Jacques, maybe to illustrate what is interesting is that in the briefing book and the documentation you provide to the authority, you need to mention which kind of material you have used for the preclinical activities, so to make the link with the CMC part. So it has to be clearly mentioned for each studies. So it's important for the regulatory bodies to know.
And exactly, so Jean-Jacques, just to reiterate my 4 things I said the FDA looks for to approve a drug label is really the active ingredient, which is the starting material, the drug substance, whether it's biologic or otherwise, the drug formulation, which is what Rick is referring to, so that's the second part, then the route of administration that Catherine is referring to, and then the therapeutic indication. So that's why it's not just the rate limiting step. I agree with Rick. It's the starting point of everything.
All right, so again, from an entrepreneur perspective, I hear this is a complex process, all these parts that have to be organized, and I need to have the right people on my team. So who am I going to hire first if I cannot have an FDA staffer? And maybe it's not the point. So who would you recommend that I'm going to have this of each of you, because you may have different opinions, but as a person that you would first hire to start this, who would you target? What are the skill sets you are looking for, Catherine?
So if we have the scientist already in the company, what would be the first and key people for me to hire is a project manager with an expertise of development. Because for small biotech company, generally many activities are external to the company. So you have to have people internally able to understand all the discipline and coordinate all the activity, and also to be able to challenge all the consultants and the vendors you are working with.
Rick, Pravin?
Pravin?
So for me, I think, it's the project manager is important, but I think, I would put equal emphasis on a development person, both pharmaceutical development, someone who knows CMC really well, and then a clinical pharmacologist or a pharmacologist who knows both non-clinical and clinical really well, so that they can bridge the gap. If I had only 2 people to hire, I would do that. If I can get a project manager also, the third person, I'd be very delighted. But I think pharmaceutical development and clinical development person is what I like.
Rick?
Yeah, I think that the project manager who has deep experience with, all these aspects of drug development is really critical. On the other hand, having a clinician or MD somehow affiliated, because they're going to be kind of they're going to help you understand where you're heading. Going back to what Pravin said, it's the TPP. It's understanding what you want your drug to do in which patients. And so having that clinical perspective focuses you in a direction. It's a really critical thing to have that focus, and I would say that when you say hire, you can hire full-time, you can rent. What you need is experience and dedication. I'm fond of saying it's not about the form of the employment agreement of the individual, it's about what's in their DNA. And I think that's the experience, the ethics, and the dedication to your program. That's what's important.